Intra-Africa trade fair postponed by 1 year amidst coronavirus pandemic. Nigeria gets IMF $3.4 billion financial assistance to fight COVID-19, and Senate approves 850 billion naira 2020 Appropriation Act loan plan. Plus, stocks advance across board as Federal Reserve wraps up policy meeting. This is Business Express, reaching you from Abuja, the nation's capital, on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. I am Amina Nujaim. Thank you for joining us today. The IMF has approved $3.4 billion in emergency financial assistance under the Rapid Financing Instrument to support the federal government's efforts in addressing the severe economic impact of COVID-19 shock and the sharp fall in oil prices. The Executive Board of the International Monetary Fund (IMF) approved Nigeria's request for the emergency financial assistance under the Rapid Financing Instrument to meet the urgent balance of payments needs stemming from the outbreak of COVID-19. The IMF projects that the near-term economic impact of COVID-19 is expected to be severe, while already high downside risks have increased. The latest approval by IMF is the largest allocation to member countries so far to assist in the fight against the pandemic. The financial support will help limit the decline in international reserves and provide financing to the budget for targeted and temporary spending increases. And now joining us via Skype to talk about the recent developments in the IMF is the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. Let me pick your thoughts on the recent developments of the grants by the International Monetary Fund.
It is a positive development for our country. The fact that we have within a very short time been able to meet the requirements to access this $3.4 billion, which is equivalent to our shareholding in the IMF is a good story. This is an excellent facility. It is at an interest rate of 1%. We have a 3.25 years moratorium and a 5-year repayment period. There are no extraneous conditions attached to this facility. The IMF has suggested that they can provide technical support to us to help us address some of the underlying challenges in the areas of revenue, and also in the areas of fiscal consolidation, as well as fiscal governance and a unification of the exchange rate. So it's a good development for our country. It will help us to stabilize the economy in view of the very significant shock we have seen from the decline of the crude oil price.
All right, Ma, the IMF is suggesting that in the immediate time that funds should be focused on health and palliatives as well as small businesses. How do you see these funds going to that direction?
First place, what they gave us is a budget support, which means as a government, we have the flexibility of applying it. But we have also agreed that the most important priorities now is health, interventions for the poor and the vulnerable, and there are many more people that are now vulnerable in the country. So we are on the same page with them on the use of the funds.
All right, thank you, Minister of Budget and National Planning, for your time and joining us on the program today. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
In light of the COVID-19, the Africa Export-Import Bank, the Africa Union, and the government of Rwanda have decided to postpone by 1 year the second Intra-Africa Trade Fair, initially set to take place from the 1st to the 7th of September 2020 in Kigali, Rwanda. The decision was endorsed by IATF 2020 Advisory Council during its 6th meeting held virtually on 26 April after careful assessment of the situation. Organized by Afrexim in collaboration with AU, the second IATF will be hosted by the government of Rwanda and is now scheduled to take place from the 6th to the 12th of September 2021 in Kigali. The Senate has approved the conversion of 850 billion naira new external borrowing in the 2020 Appropriation Act to domestic borrowing to part financing the deficit in the budget as requested by President Muhammadu Buhari.
Government has responded well under the recommendations of scientists and health experts. We will continue in our efforts in the interest of our good health
to thank the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for how far and what he has done so far.
Senate urges the executive to set up a national technical committee on COVID-19 made of relevant scientists and health professionals
To watch over these things that require funding, let us be, as much as possible, demonstrate statesmanship.
The raging agitation that's more or less trying to rush Mr. President to reopen the country. Mr. President, I'm worried.
Let me assure Nigerians that all COVID-19 intervention funds are safe in the Treasury single account, and that government is still open to donations in this regard. Government has opened special accounts with 5 commercial banks which are directly linked to the Treasury single account. Donated funds are safe in the Central Bank of Nigeria. For verifiable information about the funds and other financial obligations of the federal government, please contact us directly at the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. The account details for the donations are as follows.
And we're still talking about the borrowing plans of government to stabilize the economy as COVID-19 still persists. This time we'll be speaking with Dr. Musa Garba. He is an economist, an entrepreneur, and a lecturer, among other things. Dr. Musa Garba is with us in the studio. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Finally, the IMF has approved Nigeria's request for 3.4 billion assistance to fight COVID-19. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, $3.4 billion is a lot of money. It's about 1.5 trillion naira. And I think it's necessary. As they say, a drowning man will grab on a sharp sword just so he could save his life. Okay, beggars are not choosers. We need those funds, and they couldn't have come at a better time.
Okay. The budget of 2020 was passed in good time and it was a welcome development.
That's right.
Beautiful arrangement, everybody was happy.
That's right.
COVID-19 came along, the falling prices of fuel came along. Now, you said the loan is a welcome development.
Absolutely.
Now, in terms of finance, in bridging the finance gaps with grants like these, how do you see things playing out?
Well, I see if the funds are judiciously put into use, I see us having support for local researches. I see our local people developing ventilators and producing locally manufactured PPEs. I see support for our educational sector. I see a lot of people going into content production for online education and perhaps even free study materials to our schools.
Okay. The IMF kind of suggested something close to what you're talking about, that the funds should be spent on fighting COVID-19 and palliatives for citizens as well as small businesses. Same question. How do you see this playing out?
Nigeria is currently, we are like in a partial stroke situation. It is funds like this that will not only bring about the palliatives for households and small businesses, like you said, but the truth is, those are temporary measures. In a few days or a few weeks from now, after lockdown, how do we reflate the economy and make sure it's sustainable? It is by the proper applications of funds of this magnitude. And that can go into as a stimulus for businesses, like you rightly said. We could see an agricultural revolution, and I hail states that are partner states to G20, like Imo, Kaduna, Abia, Katsina, Bauchi, that are looking strongly towards agriculture. That is sustainable.
Okay, all this talk is about the short term. What do you see happening in medium to long term in terms of recovery and bridging the gap?
Yes. The same agriculture that I mentioned, because while we're talking COVID-19 pandemic, there is the hunger pandemic. Okay? Now, unless there is food, all the 70,000 metric tons that the government has shared are from our reserves. Do we have enough to cater for the future? We can do without education, without clothes, without so many things, but we cannot do without food. That is the potential crisis. So unless the best time to have started that was yesterday, the next best time is to start now.
Right, moving forward. Where exactly is starting now?
Where exactly is starting now is for states particularly to quickly look for private concerns like some of us and together bring about what we call agric villages. Okay, states will now take their comparative advantages. There's no new money again. Oil is no longer the Father Christmas. Agriculture is the new oil, and that's our future. So we need to start now by doing soil tests, by determining what produce are best for X state and Y state. What are those things that we can hopefully consume locally and export in the very near future?
Okay. All this talk is about loans and grants. So much borrowing taking place from development partners, other countries to Nigeria. Is loan the way to go?
Loan isn't usually the way to go. But when you have a crisis of this nature, you need something that will inject the economy and bounce it back. We need something to jumpstart the economy. And so at this time, loan isn't a bad idea if it will be judiciously monitored, put into the proper use. And we as citizens, as followers, we have a duty to also monitor whether those funds are put into their proper use.
Talking about funds, what do you make of the decision of the 850 external borrowing plan by the National Assembly?
I think it was very timely, and I commend the National Assembly. I indeed commend the federal government also for the steps it's taken so far to fight the pandemic. Without that 850 billion naira that was passed yesterday, I wonder what other measures government would have had to take to fill up these financial gaps from our budget.
Okay, in terms of looking for alternative sources in the sources of revenue in the long term, what would you say to government, for instance, or those who need to know these things to make things happen?
Well, we need to consider that over time we cannot go cap in hand begging. We need to have those things that will actually generate new income for us. And it's time to go back to land. This time not lip service, but true production for our consumption and export. Agriculture is the way forward.
You're talking about production.
Yes.
What is the place of manufacturing in Nigeria right now?
Well, it's not something you want to look at. But we know that Nigeria can be the next giant of the world. We can be the next China of the world, but we have to start today. The place of manufacture is a shame today, but that doesn't mean that's how it is bound to remain. We can change all of that. COVID has been enough shock for us to wake up.
That's what I was. But yeah, COVID is a shock. No one saw this coming.
That's right.
Maybe probably the falling price of oil possibly was expected, but to check such occurrences for economies, what would you say?
Well, there are things that you can't forecast. There are things that the shock becomes so huge that it becomes very difficult, that you're only trying to survive. But we know, by all means, by God's grace, we will survive this phase. The point is, what next post-COVID? And I still insist, agriculture, food, to ensure that there is food is key. Whatever else we are thinking about, food should be the priority. We can consider health, we can consider governance, power, security, everything. But food is number one priority.
Dr. Musa Bawa-Garba says food is the priority. We'll end this discussion this way. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much.
And the federal government has asked a court in New York to compel 10 foreign banks to release to its account details of former President Goodluck Jonathan, his wife Patience, and the former Minister of Petroleum Resources. Jonathan on Tuesday, however, denied owning a foreign bank account. The federal government's request was contained in an application filed at the foreign court on March 24th asking for the bank documents. The Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami, asked for the bank documents in a bid to overturn the PID $9.6 billion judgment. The Nigerian Stock Exchange resisted shocks from the coronavirus pandemic to record gains the first 2 days of trading this week. This Wednesday, the capital market closed the 29th of April bullish. The OSHA index appreciated by 0.62 to close at 22,868.40 basis points, with market capitalization at 11.9 trillion naira. 277.4 million shares valued at 2.5 billion naira traded in 4,464 deals. The most active stocks were led by FBN Holdings, UBA and Lasaco, while MTN led the gainers and Etana the decliners. On global scene, markets traded positive in early trading while awaiting the outcome of the Federal Reserve's two-day policy meeting that concludes Wednesday. Bosede Abel has a summary of market performance.
Investors around the globe have continued to strive as coronavirus continues to hamper on global economy. Stocks futures in the United States rose in early trading of Wednesday, 29th April, as investors looked for guidance from the Federal Reserve on the future path of interest rates, with a gradual reopening of the economy in sight. Asian stocks edged mostly higher as investors awaited the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision on interest rates. The Shanghai Composite was up 0.44% to 2,822.44. Hang Seng Index advanced 0.28% as of its final hour of trading, and Nikkei 0.06%. European markets were muted ahead of the latest monetary policy decision from the United States Federal Reserve. Stocks in Africa were mixed, with South Africa's JSE Africa Top 40, Namibia's overall index, and Nairobi's all share posting gains.
Oil prices swayed wildly on Tuesday between gains and losses as investors continue to keep an eye on depleting crude storage space amid a dearth in demand. Let's see the price of oil and other commodities in the global market this Wednesday. We are going to take another short break and we will be right back. Let's now see how the Naira is faring alongside other major currencies. And this brings us to the end of this edition of Business Express. We value your feedback, so keep the comments, observations and suggestions coming. Be informed that all previous episodes are available on YouTube on NTA's channel. You can also communicate with us on Twitter and the handle is @NTA News. Now don't forget the hashtag BizX. Remember to always keep your hands clean and wash your hands with soap and water under running water, or use a sanitizer as the world battles COVID-19. Join us again on Friday for another package. I am Amina Nujain.